Inflation was sky high in 2022, but what did that do to rent? That's what I'm thinking about today. So of course, last year, we had inflation that was the highest we've seen in decades and decades, and the prices of a lot of things readily apparent, gas, the gallon of milk, those sorts of things certainly went up. And I was reading an article recently, and it talked about the price of rent, how it has changed over the last year in 50 major metropolitan areas. And I thought it was really interesting. We'll pull up the graphic here from that and put a link, of course, in the show notes, but just really interesting at the level of how rents have gone up, right? And so you can see some of the numbers sort of higher up on the graph here, right? A couple places in North Carolina, Cleveland, Ohio, 15+% increases in rent, kind of crazy, right? But I was also sort of interested to see in the purple dots down here, some pretty significant decreases in the median rent, right? Really surprised to see Chicago and how far down they've gone. In Austin, Texas, that to me, at least in my head, booming city, people moving there, continued growth. And actually we've seen rents go down apparently over the last year while inflation went up, right? Just really interesting to take a look at that. And of course there are more blue dots where rents went up than purple dots where rents went down. But take a look at the levels on there. I kind of eyeballed that 5% and under level. There's a lot of, even when rent went up, there's a lot of those blue dots that were up less than 5%. Right? And so inflation was something higher than that last year, right? So a lot of rents didn't either went down or didn't even keep up with inflation. Really interesting to look at that from that standpoint. But there was something else that I saw in this graph as I was looking at this too. One, of course, is what we just described, how much rent went up or surprisingly went down. But looking left to right on just the raw numbers, right? As far as how much the median rent costs in these major areas. Not surprising, of course, to see over on the right-hand side, New York, Boston, San Francisco, rents, in and above the $4,000 a month range, right? But also surprising, looking at where Chicago is down there at something around half that. And same thing with Austin. And just looking at some of those raw numbers left to right, take a minute and sort of review where that is. What it made me think about is some of the choices that we have and how things maybe are changing over the years or can be changing here in the coming years. My niece is living in New York City right now, up there, right? $4,000 a month median rent. And, usually it's for a pretty small apartment there too, right? But take a look, major city here closer to the Midwest. You want to live in Chicago, something like half that cost. $100,000, as we talked about in a previous episode, $100,000 of earnings in New York with rent at $4,000 a month on average, doesn't feel like $100,000 even in Chicago with rent something like half that, or in Cleveland, or in Raleigh, or those sorts of things. And where we choose to live, it sometimes feels like we don't have choices and our lives sort of are what they are, but you think about being able to choose, and it's not, do I want to live in a metropolitan city or not, or live out in the sticks? It's, yep, some major cities. What about other major cities that have costs of living that are maybe in this case looks like half or less than those of the big cities? What about things like even where we choose to live locally? Here in the Madison area, you live in Madison, Middleton, one of the connected suburbs, cost of housing is really high. You go just a half hour outside into some of the smaller communities and you can save a lot of money on your housing, and that half hour commute isn't so bad when it's through rolling farm fields. So we have choices on that, and think about the choices that we have now, especially after COVID. Virtual work is much more a reality than it used to be. And just think about this. Can I work and get New York wages but maybe live in Chicago or live in Cleveland, have that cost of living, but yet those salaries? It'll be really interesting to see where this plays out. And that's what I'm thinking about here today. As always, interested in knowing what you're thinking about. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please jot a comment in the comment box or shoot me an email directly. And as always, thanks for watching.